Hi everyone! Today we're going to paint this cozy winter teapot using watercolor pencils. This illustration has quite a bit of detail, and that's exactly what makes it so fun and interesting to work on. So let's get started. You can find the full list of materials I'm using in this video in the description below. I already have my sketch ready. You can draw your own version or use a ready-made outline from my Etsy shop. We'll need a paper towel to absorb excess water and pigment and to clean our brushes as we work. I'm using 2 water brush pens. You can absolutely use just one. I like having a second one on handy in case the first runs out of water. We'll also be using 3 watercolor pencils. The colors you'll need are shown on the screen. And for small white details, you can use a white gel pen or a bit of white gouache. I'd like to point out that the trees and houses in the background can be simplified quite a lot. You can suggest them just as simple silhouettes. The most important thing is to clearly show the one house that's closer to us and the trees that are in the foreground. So let's begin. I'm taking my blue pencil and starting by tracing the outline of the teapot. I'll simply go over the entire shape, outlining everything with this blue color. Alright, our outlines are done. Now we're moving on to applying the pencil cover itself. On the handle, the spout, and the lid of teapot, you can see the highlights that I marked earlier. We'll carefully work around these areas with the pencil, leaving them uncolored. We'll start with the darkest areas first. Now we move on to the winter landscape and start coloring the houses themselves. We'll work inside the house shapes, carefully going around the windows, leaving the windows and the roofs uncolored. Now let's move on the sky. There are a couple of ways you can approach this. You can color the sky with your pencil, carefully working around the white dots, or you can color the entire sky first and add the white dots later. Those white dots will represent snow, and you can add them using a white gel pen or a bit of white gouache. Now we move on to the trees. Our trees will stay white, covered in snow. I'm outlining them with a slightly stronger, more saturated line. I also add an outline to the snow and begin suggesting a bit of shadow right away, so it's clear that the houses are sitting on a small elevation. Then, very simply, I go over the branches and trees once more with a bit more pressure, making them look richer and more vibrant. I also want to add a more defined outline around the teapot itself. We'll add the yellow windows a little later. The most important thing for now is to try to preserve the white areas. And now we move on to the most enjoyable and exciting part, activating the watercolor pencil with water. I'm using my water brush pen, and I also have another very handy tool, a sponge brush. It's great for lifting excess pigment and creating highlights wherever needed. We're ready to start painting. I gently press on my brush pen to make sure it's nicely saturated with water. I begin by activating the pencil on the handle, carefully working around the highlights. This will be our first layer, and we'll deepen it a bit later. For now, I'm wetting the area again to make sure the handle stays nice and damp. This is important because before adding the second layer of color, which we apply on wet, the surface needs to be moist, so the pencil doesn't scratch the paper. Now we move on to the second layer. I'm using the same blue pencil and applying a more intense color to the darker areas for the second time. If the area starts to dry, simply re-wet it with a bit of water before continuing. In this way, we continue building up the shadow areas, making them more intense. Then, using a clean damp brush, I gently blend the edges, creating a smooth transition from dark to light. I gently pull the pigment outward, creating a smooth gradient. And in the same way, we move on the remaining areas. We activate the pencil on each section first, then re-wet the area and apply a second, more intense layer, always working on a wet surface. Now we move on to the winter landscape. On our teapot, I start activating the pencil around the snowflakes. I'd like to show you another way to create snowflakes. While the surface of the teapot is still wet and the paint is damp, you can use a cotton swab or a paper towel. I'm using my sponge brush and simply lifting the paint. This lightens the area and creates a beautiful snowflake effect. I paint the area above the spout first and then move on the snow in the landscape. I start with the lighter areas, gently activating the pencil and adding water. I begin along the outline and then carefully move downward into the darker, more intense areas, creating a smooth transition from light to a deeper blue. Now we move on to the houses. I gently activate the pencil along the outlines, making sure to preserve the lighter areas on the roofs, especially in the center. And while the roofs are drying, we move on to the trees. Using a damp brush, I simply go over the outlines, activating our beautiful blue branches. We work on the background the same way. Now we begin carefully activating the pencil on the houses themselves, working around the light windows. While the surface is still wet, we also add a bit of shadow to give the houses more depth. Now we move on to the snow. I clean my brush and using a damp brush go over the pencil along the outlines. I focus on blending more intensely underneath the teapot, where the shadows are stronger. That area needs a bit more depth, so I softly connect and blend the color there. Now we simply add a yellow pencil to the windows. You don't even need to activate this color with water, you can leave it just as it is. Now we move on to the detailing and adding deeper shadow areas. I start with the handle. You can activate the pencil directly by touching the tip with a bit of water. That might feel easier for you to control. I apply the color to the darker areas and gently blend it out from dark to light using a clean damp brush. In all other areas, it's very important to always keep the surface wet before adding a second, third, or any additional layers of pencil. This helps prevent damage because watercolor pencil lids are quite firm and can scratch the paper if the surface is dry. We keep working through the shadow areas to add depth and shape to the teapot. And now we'll add the final details using a white gel pen. I gently go over the snowflakes once again, making them brighter, especially the ones that may have softened or faded during painting. I also add a few small snowflakes, just darken them, lightly here and there. It's a very simple touch, but that's a lovely finish on detail. And that's it, our beautiful cozy winter teapot is finished. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was interesting and helpful for you. Please give this video a like, let me know in the comments if you tried painting along, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you next time.